Here is CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Good evening from Chicago, where the 35th the National Democratic Convention opens tomorrow with the promise of turmoil inside this hall and a threat of violence without. A Democratic convention is about to begin in a police state. There just doesn't seem to be any other way to say it.
I think we're being tried with carrying a state of mind across the state border.
This is the kind of thing which escalates an already tense situation, which convinces our people that this was an act of political persecution and certainly can lead to future difficulties.
How much is it worth to you to call it off?
Call off
$1
what?
million? Would you have done it for $1 million?
Revolution?
What's your price?
My life.
All rise. The trial of the Netflix show The Trial of the Chicago 7 has commenced. Case is the people of History City versus the Aaron Sorkin and Netflix movie. Before we go over bail, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, or join us in the comments down below. What did you think of this movie? Prosecute it with us. The movie was written to mirror modern protest and legal battles, but does it really accomplish that? Welcome to Lights, Camera, History. I'm Jack Murphy, and this is the show where we do deep dives and obsessive research into movies Hollywood claims is based on history. Depending on how they do, we give them a grade. Dear Hollywood, class is in session. Before we begin, we'd like to thank the University of Missouri School of Law and the United States Department of the Interior Legal Collection for posting the full and completely unedited transcripts of the trial. That's right, we here at History City went through months of transcripts. Several people alive that were present at the trial have gone on record about how they feel about the movie. So, Kangaroo Court, here we come. The Trial of the Chicago 7 is a 2020 American historical legal drama film written and directed by Aaron Sorkin. The film follows the Chicago 7, a group of anti-Vietnam War protesters charged with conspiracy and crossing state lines with the intention of inciting riots at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. That year was an election year, and the Vietnam War was pressing on, as more and more young men were being drafted. At the Democratic National Convention, party leaders were hoping to keep the party's messaging tightly controlled. Since President Lyndon B. Johnson has refused to run for another term, the convention only needed one ballot to decide a nominee. They would choose a Democrat establishment candidate in Hubert Humphrey. Humphrey had hoped civil rights and voting reforms would be the hot topic at the convention. However, outside the arena was chaos. The riots would have long-term repercussions for the Democratic Party and the country. The riots forced Americans to talk about opposition to the Vietnam War. If the movie deserves credit for anything, it's putting humor into an emotional topic without cheapening or demeaning anything. It's a fine line between being inappropriate and adding in some humor to balance the movie. Originally, Spielberg was interested in directing. He had to drop out, and the gentleman from the West Wing writer's room would sit in that director's chair. Sorkin is a writer whose style is pretty unique. He's dived into writing based on true events, others including Moneyball, The Social Network, and Charlie Wilson's War. The film was released on Netflix and considered an Oscar contender. The question before the jury is, did Sorkin stick to the facts? The film stars Eddie Redmayne as Tom Hayden, Sacha Baron Cohen as Abby Hoffman, Alex Sharp as Rennie Davis, Jeremy Strong as Jerry Rubin, John Carroll Lynch as David Dellinger, Noah Robbins as Lee Weiner, Daniel Flatley as John Fronez, Yahya Abdul-Martin II as Bobby Seale, Mark Rylance as William Kunstler, Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Richard Schultz, Ben Schenkman as Leonard Weinglass, J.C. McKenzie as Tom Ferran, Frank Lagella as Judge Julius Hoffman. The movie begins in August 1968, but shows flashbacks establishing some historical context of that year. In August 1968, Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, David Dellinger, Lee Weiner, John Fronez, and Bobby Seale make preparations to protest at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. 5 months later, they are arrested and charged with crossing state lines to incite a riot, which violates the Rapp-Brown Act. The Attorney General appoints Tom Ferran and Richard Schultz as the prosecutors, while all the defendants except Seale are represented by William Kunstler and Leonard Weinglass. Judge Julius Hoffman shows significant prejudice for the prosecution, especially insisting that he and Abby Hoffman are not related. Seale's attorney, Charles Gary, cannot attend due to illness, leading Judge Hoffman to insist that Kunstler represent him. This insistence is rejected by both Kunstler and Seale. Seale receives support from Fred Hampton, which the judge assumes is legal help. Throughout the trial, testimony is matched by flashbacks. Abby and others led a protest at the police station where Hayden was detained, but turned around upon seeing the police blockade outside. A riot ensues. Days later, the defendants learned that Fred Hampton was killed during a police raid. In retaliation for Seale continuing to speak up for his constitutional rights, Judge Hoffman has him taken to another room, beaten, and returned gagged and chained by the marshals. This causes the defense and prosecution to object, and Judge Hoffman declares Seale's case a mistrial and severs him from the case. The defense puts Ramsey Clark, Batman Attorney General, during the riots on the stand. Judge Hoffman refuses to let him testify in front of the jury, as he had declined to initiate prosecutions after the riots because of evidence that the Chicago Police Department instigated them. Dellinger punches a bailiff, resulting in his arrest. Kunstler presents a tape implicating Hayden to the defendants and preps Hayden for cross-examination. On the night of the riot, Davis tried to pacify offers, trying to arrest someone climbing a flagpole. After the police clubbed Davis's head, an enraged Hayden exclaimed, "If blood is going to flow, then let it flow all over the city." Abby deduces that Hayden had misspoken, claiming the statement would have started with, "If blood is going to flow." Realizing that mistake would be exploitable on the stand, Hayden asked Abby to testify. At the end of the trial, Hayden is given a chance by Judge Hoffman, who feels Hayden is genuinely remorseful, to make a case for a lenient sentence. However, over Judge Hoffman's objections, Hayden uses his closing remarks to name the 4,752 soldiers who were killed in the Vietnam War since the trial began. The act prompts many in the court to stand and cheer, with even Schultz choosing to stand out of respect. Let's dive right into this. Let's start with the riots and some politics. We here couldn't find anything about the tape and Hayden misspeaking at a rally. An independent investigation concluded that the violent protest resulted in a small encounter between a few protesters and some inexperienced police officers. Both sides were incredibly anxious, and it was just a matter of time before the fast winds became a hurricane. The situation was a powder keg. Law enforcement from several different agencies were undercover in the protest. Each had their own reason. The FBI were watching some of these people because of contacts they had in Vietnam and other communist sympathizers. The motivation of the prosecution is a key factor in the plot. There is a huge problem with the premise that Sorkin sets up. The movie has the resignation of Ramsey Clark being a driving motivator as to why the new Attorney General, Mitchell, decided to go after the 8 defendants. That doesn't make much sense, so Mitchell was embarrassed. But why does that mean he's going to prosecute these defendants? By the movie's own logic, the defendants helped Nixon get elected. They spoiled the convention and helped the Republicans. In truth, the government was tired of these guys. The Chicago riots gave the Justice Department a golden reason to arrest them. Let's take the Yippies, for example, the Youth International Party. They were destructive everywhere they went. They were involved in incidents in New York City, Washington, D.C., and would often trash a particular place, leaving the city with criminal records and bad publicity for the city that hosted it. This is exactly why they couldn't get permits and aid from Chicago. Chicago's mayor didn't want to encourage this specific type of protest. I get that this was Washington establishment lashing out against these groups, but that wasn't the real motivation. Let's get into the meat of the movie, the trial. For some reason, the movie makes Schultz to be a sympathetic character. At nowhere in the transcripts is this accurate. This guy was aggressive in his prosecution, and he didn't care that Hoffman was so one-sided. He was likely wasting his time prosecuting them. But that might have been the point. After all, it was a show trial. Jerry Rubin once described him as a bulldog. The swing by Dellinger never happened. He was even able to stay pacifist when a marshal struck one of his children. In one of the film's comedic moments, Hoffman and Rubin appear in judges' robes to poke a little fun at Judge Hoffman. However, there is conflicting reports as to whether they had on police uniforms, and some remembered it as just Abby Hoffman that had a uniform on. The movie also shows Fred Hampton's murder as the reason for Seal's outburst and subsequent gagging and chaining. However, Hampton's death occurred after Seal's trial had already been severed, and Seal was no longer present at the trial of the other 7. This is used for Seal to become agitated, probably because it's hard to convey months of prejudicial treatment by the judge. And sadly, the bounding and gagging is all too real. He was bound and gagged for 2 days before being severed. When Schultz, who by the way Abby just loved the idea of calling Richard Schultz, Dick anytime he could, when he asked him what was on his mind and Hoffman responds, "I've never been on trial for my thoughts before," was 2 things mashed together. In his testimony, he responds that he may have dreamt something. This quote comes from a period in the trial where Judge Hoffman is handing out sentences for contempt charges. This was before the jury verdict, and Hoffman gave the defendants a chance to speak before handing out sentences. Hoffman said it was weird being asked about testifying to a dream as a motive. Speaking of Hoffman, strangely enough, the movie version was a saner version of the type of judge he actually was. He was clearly crazy, belligerent, and although I'm not a lawyer, he gave reason for appeal in the first few minutes when he cited an objection by the prosecution over something that was relatively minor. According to Sorkin, he didn't think that Hoffman would have been believable had he been written literally. I say this pretty comfortably. He was crazy and should have never been the judge for this. In the movie, Rennie Davis keeps a notebook with all the names of U.S. soldiers who died in Vietnam during the trial. In real life, Rennie Davis wrote down the names of Vietnamese soldiers as well, although they were not read aloud when the defendants, namely Tom Hayden, was allowed to address the court. The real trial transcript shows that all the defendants were given a chance to speak. I found some of what they said to be in bad taste. This would have been a chance to coherently lay out their message to the world. Instead, they talked about drugs, anti-establishment sentiments, and mostly just used the chance to speak freely to Judge Hoffman. I just see it as a missed opportunity. Don't believe me? Here's a screenshot of the transcript of Abby Hoffman ranting and raving about LSD. In real life, it was Dellinger that tries to read the names out loud, but was cited for contempt in seconds, and that was the end of that. It's debatable how guilty the defendants were. The government had a legitimate case that these defendants acted in a manner in which they created the framework for violent acts. But 2 things can be true at once. This still was a political trial motivated by payback, and the Chicago 7 came to Chicago looking for trouble. Judge Hoffman did nothing but give the defense reasons to appeal. The Chicago 7 were massively disrespectful the entire time, making it worse.
Father, no.
Wouldn't it have been funny if Hoffman was on their side the entire time and was purposely blowing the trial for the appeals court? Some other aspects worth mentioning include some smaller things that were fictional was the character of FBI Special Agent Fitzgerald. The FBI didn't employ female agents, therefore the romance between her and Rubin didn't happen. For some reason, a fictional attempted sexual assault is depicted as several fraternity brothers become angry that a female protester is waving an American flag. They approach her and attempt to sexually assault her. The entire ordeal is fictional. So, in summary, there is some truth to the movie, but it's incredibly one-sided, and Aaron Sorkin wrote this with modern politics in mind. The trial was more nuanced than establishment bad, protesters good. Sorkin did write this movie as a reflection of modern protesting and some of the things happening today. Here are some clips of some of the press conferences side by side.
Call off what?
$1 million? Would you have done it for $1 million?
Revolution?
Yeah. What's your price? What's your price?
My life. Carrying a state of mind across the state border. And it's a very unusual law. We're the first ones to be tried under it.
Be the greatest lawyer in the world. But I think that I am at this moment along with my colleague Leonard Weinglass, the most privileged, being punished for what we believe in.
Sorkin absolutely nailed this aspect. It was a nice touch. So, in summary, there is some truth to the movie, but it's incredibly one-sided, and Aaron Sorkin wrote this with modern politics in mind. Little fun fact, let's talk about Forrest Gump, the character that was screaming into the microphone in the D.C. rally. It's supposed to be Abby Hoffman. We find this movie guilty of third-degree Aaron Sorkinism. For the final grade, we give it a D. D for definitely guilty of not being historically accurate. Well, folks, we thank you for watching and we hope you enjoyed this video. What did you think of this movie? Let us know down below. We now have a Facebook account, so check that out. If you have a movie you want us to do, let us know. Thanks for watching.